From Covering Climate Now and the Poynter Institute, I'm Anna Hyatt, and this is a special joint webinar to help you cover what's at stake in the Republican tax bill moving through Congress. Joining me today is Jon Greenberg from Poynter. Hi, Jon.
Hi, Anna.
Jon runs Poynter's Beat Academy, a training program very similar to ours, and we thought we'd team up for this one today. We're focused on the GOP plans to terminate or greatly reduce the climate change provisions in the Inflation Reduction Act. Today's conversation will be recorded and posted on YouTube and the Covering Climate Now site. During the event, please direct any questions you have to the chat box. We'll be using that today instead of the usual Q&A function, and we're so looking forward to the discussion. Over to you, Jon.
All right, Anna, thank you very much. I am super glad that we could work on this together. I want to thank everyone who has tuned in and is in the process of tuning in. I know how that all works. We're really glad you're taking the time. I do want to emphasize we do take questions at any point, so put them in the chat and we will get to as many as we can. As we get started in your Zoom profile, please put your name and news organization if it isn't already there. So you all know the broad outlines of what's going on. The Inflation Reduction Act had hundreds of billions of dollars of incentives to move the country toward cleaner energy. And now the Trump administration and congressional Republicans are moving to get rid of some entirely and make a huge dent in others. And they're using a legislative process called reconciliation, and it can pass with a simple majority. Now, there are over 1,500 solar, wind, and battery facilities planned or under construction, and about half of them possibly could be at risk, depending on what Congress does. And that is a lot of money and a lot of jobs. But in addition to those facilities, about 750,000 households took advantage of rooftop solar credits last year, and those credits would soon go away under both the House and Senate proposals. So if you want to give the state and local angle on what's at stake, we are here to help speed you on your way. And when I said we want to take your questions, I meant it. We want to make this work for you. And we've got some awesome guests to help with all of this. Alexa St. John from the AP will lay out the key changes in the Republican package. Then Tom Taylor with Atlas Public Policy will show us how to use their data to spot exactly which projects are taking place where you are. And then finally, Scott Waldman with Politico's E&E News. He's going to give us a window into the state of play in Washington. As you've heard, red states are doing particularly well with the IRA incentives, but so far that hasn't fully protected them in this bill. So let's focus on the Republican plans. Alexa, are you ready?
I'm ready. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, now I am going to mess around and do something really dangerous. I am going to share screen and let's see here. Boom. Let's share it. Okay. We have got the share up and running, and if everyone can see that screen, I guess we can get going. Alexa, thanks for being here. Let me pop in and just get to some of the key changes. By the way, I'm going to tell you something. We will share these slides with everyone. So you can go back to this later. You don't need to screenshot. You don't need to take notes frantically. It's all going to be here, as well as we've got a list of resources. A lot of them we'll talk about in the course of the conversation. So here's our quick list of some of the prominent tax credits targeted by Republicans. Let's see, that's not it. Yeah, there we go. And then what I want to do is just, take them in turn. So Alexa, let's talk about the first two, the kind of projects they subsidize. We're talking here about clean electricity production and investment credits for wind and solar. Tell us a little bit about how things work and where things stand.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. And I'll admit I have some notes in front of me here because things are changing so rapidly and wanted to make sure our audience has exactly the latest on all of this. We're tracking closely. But these two, this refers to the clean electricity production credit and then also the clean electricity investment credit, really impacting industry broadly. And these are two sort of tech neutral credits that kind of apply to any technology that can produce electricity with zero emissions. So 45Y pays a set amount for every unit of electricity generated. And then 48E pays a fraction of the capital cost for a qualifying generation or storage tech. So when you think about 45Y, the latest draft begins phasing out the credits for electricity produced by wind or solar in 2026. So that means for qualified facilities, the construction of which begins in 2026, they receive only 60% of the credit. And in 27, these facilities receive only 20% and then no credit by 2028.
Hey, Alexa,
And
let me
then
just ask you, the under the current rules, these tax credits would have been in place for a full decade up
yes,
to 2032, and then they would phase out. So really
exactly.
moving up the time frame enormously.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the exact same goes for 48E as far as investments in wind or solar. Again, investments where the construction begins in 26, you only receive 60%, and then it goes down from there, 20% in 2027, no credit by 28. So these phase out dates, they are adjusted from the House version to give a little bit more lead time for these projects, but it's still a huge challenge to the industry. Obviously, we know companies, investors, they're racing to try to meet the requirements for getting shovels in the ground. But this is no easy task, right? So, together, I think as far as these two are concerned, and really the rest of what we're talking about, I mean, these changes, this shortened timeline can play a role in how well the US is able to transition to renewables.
Okay, just
Many
yeah. What was my quick question here? The House had a provision saying these projects have to be online and producing. The
Mhm.
Senate kind of dialed it down and said you've got to be under construction. That's a
Mhm.
fundamental difference that we're looking at, right?
Exactly. But still, I mean, as far as the industry is concerned, and many lobbyists have been having these conversations over the past several days, really they view the credits as basically negated, just given how quick these timelines are. They seem to many folks I've spoken with, interviewed over the past few days, just as unreasonable.
Yeah, yeah. Let's just take a look at a little example so we can put some dollars to this. This actually came from a really nifty exercise, came out of Columbia University, where what they did is they worked with a firm that puts these deals together. And they kind of came up with this sort of sample pro forma to give an idea of how much these tax credits are worth. So, I've given their basic assumptions here on the slide. Uh, the bottom line is actually pretty interesting because if you were taking the investment tax credit, which is about 30%, then you'd be looking at close to a $30 million value, a tax credit worth that much. It's amazing. When I was taking a look at their equity investment, okay, they're at about 50 million. So automatically, if you're just a person putting your money in, you can see how powerful the impact of this tax credit is. Now, Anna, you were just scanned, and there are some big projects in a variety of states, red states and blue states, that they are not online. Tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely, and I'll give Tom a shout out to some of the projects here. But I mean, really, it's something that, again, industry is racing to chat with Republicans in DC over the past several days, weeks, to try to, figure out if there could be any potential changes to, what is currently in the text. So we should have started with a caveat, things could change. There's always that possibility. But it's existential, I think, to the industry ultimately. So there's projects in Virginia, Washington, New Mexico, Georgia. I mean, just as a few examples, but across the country.
Yeah, and I mean Georgia is interesting. We're going to talk a little bit later when we're talking with Scott. Georgia has an enormous amount of EV production, battery stuff. It's got solar facilities, and it is a very red state. And it is interesting to see the situation that Republican lawmakers there find themselves in. However, I mean, just not to give away too much, they are sort of talking behind the scenes, but don't speak publicly against the overall package. It's like this is going to go through. Let's move on to something. I mean, we do understand solar power, wind power, but there's this thing called advanced manufacturing. And I wondered if you could kind of flesh out what this refers to. What are the things that are getting the tax credits?
Absolutely. And this one's a little bit more complex, at least to me, but this refers to 45X, and wind is really big for this one. So the latest text, it phases out the credit for producing critical minerals, but most notably, I think, it phases out early the credit for wind components. So those produced and sold after December 2027. This will impact states like North Carolina, Nevada, Kentucky, Indiana. Again, just across the country, we'll see an impact. But this credit broadly addresses the production of batteries, solar energy components, wind energy components, inverters, critical minerals, like I mentioned, and an Atlas report that I saw actually called it a supply side incentive, really that complements the demand side clean energy incentives. So really, this matters ultimately because manufacturing needs to be able to have demand for their products in order for there to be that return on investment. They need a market to supply into, which means they really need those energy producers, those putting energy onto the grid, to need American-made inverters and other components. And similarly, 48D would phase out advanced manufacturing investment. So similar concept as before. I will note, I mean, in some cases, the loss of tax credits might actually, impact plans. Larger projects could still move forward. There's the potential to accelerate construction, but again, an all around really challenging environment, potentially.
Right. And one of the things that seems to be in place with looking at the advanced manufacturing is it's kind of looking upstream from the final thing you're using, whether it's an EV or whether it's a wind turbine. They're saying all of the different widgets and things that go into making that wind turbine work. Sorry, we are pulling back any of the incentives, which if you're working on a wind turbine project, then you're going to be looking at higher costs because you're not going to be having the subsidy, and that's going to change your calculation. And I do appreciate your caveat. You will hear the argument that these tax credits are not fundamentally needed by lawmakers that want to move this legislation forward, super high priority for President Trump. And in some instances, they may be pivotal. By the way, I think it's also fair to say that there are some projects that you will see on the books that are dogs. They've got fleas, and it didn't matter about the tax credits. They might never fly. So we have to be cautious anytime we're looking at a particular example. By the way, while I got you, Alexa, just say you were looking at any particular project, whether it's making some sort of like inverter that goes into a turbine or um, a solar array, industrial scale. How are you going to begin approaching reporting on that? Where are you going to go? What's on your checklist of
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple
reporting?
of different things. One, I really want to look at, what the company investor has promised as far as the project. Let's look back at those very early plans, those initial press releases, those initial kind of target dates, deadlines, investment amount, all of those good things. But I think you also too want to check in on kind of the community impact and also the workforce impact, right? So how is a community, a city, a neighborhood preparing for this potential project, preparing for this company to come in, spend all of this money, and what is the workforce development looking like ahead of that project? Because if these things do come crashing down, that's a significant impact on the local side, right? I mean, folks that are preparing for these jobs, but not only that, just shoring up the community, the lunch spots, the coffee places, whatever it is to, build that local economy around this major development investment. All of those things are really important to look at. Definitely touching base with the city itself, what they have planned, the municipality, what they have planned. But I think I always like to start with what were those initial targets and how realistic, are things as things progress.
Also, as you're pointing out, the bigger the project, the longer the runway. And
Mhm.
the more time that the community may have been gearing itself to take full advantage of this. So like if you're looking at a community college that says there are going to be these electrician jobs or what have you, right? Uh, they may have already made certain commitments. So there's many threads that you can follow when you're taking a look at any given project. Um, the There's a lot of attention paid to the big facilities, but as we're going to see in a little bit, there are a lot of dollars tied up at the domestic level, just like home use, um, and the phase out on these is really quick. I mean, we're talking about if I'm going to put in a heat pump, I'm going to put in rooftop solar, solar heater. Um, the What have you been hearing back about, what these things actually mean to people, why they might matter?
Sure, sure. Well, I think, as journalists, we tend to focus on the industry impact at times because of all of those things you just mentioned, right? Because of the trickle down effects on communities, workforces, et cetera. But really, I think this slide points to what consumers are especially tuned into, really care about. So two changes stand out to me. One is 25C, so that's the energy efficient home improvement credit. So you're talking insulation or heating or cooling systems that essentially, bring down a consumer's energy usage and their energy bills. Things that are becoming increasingly important amid the climate crisis that we're in. And so consumers could receive a credit for about 30% of improvements that qualified, residential energy property or home energy audits, other improvements, which could be a significant amount of money. The cost of some of these things has gone down over time with scale, but they're still expensive. They're not necessarily accessible for the average person. So credits can make a big difference. And they were originally expiring in 32. The latest has the credits ending about 180 days after the bill is signed, so passed. So that's an extremely fast turnaround, and folks might have been thinking about these projects, trying to assess their different options, talking with contractors, et cetera. And 180 days would come up quite quickly. The same goes for 25D. That's the residential clean energy credit. So more to what you were pointing to, solar water heating, fuel cells, small wind energy, geothermal heat pumps, Again, the 30% credit through 2032, and then it would drop in 33 and 34. But with the latest, it'd be 180 days after it passes that it would be terminated. And then there's also some incentives for builders constructing new energy efficient homes, apartments. Those would end 12 months after passage. So really significant. I mean, just can't stress enough how inaccessible these projects can be without these credits and how much folks have relied on them.
Yeah, the IRS kept track of how many people actually took advantage of these and claimed the credits in 2023 on their tax returns, and the numbers are really pretty big. 750,000 households doing the solar thing, installation 700,000, and the IRS gives you the excuse me, gives you the average value of the credits. So $27,000 on average for rooftop solar, pretty big deal. One of the things that you just alluded to, which would certainly be part of the reporting at the local level, is the companies that are doing the installation. And this is not necessarily rooftop solar, which people can sort of say, well, that's a niche. But the people who put in the replacement windows, that stuff is huge. Insulation, it's huge. And it can be virtually mom and pop, right? So there are ways that the activity that's reduced, if these reductions come through in the reconciliation package, are going to affect some bread and butter business. Now, that said, we've got the whole issue with the EVs, right? Very contentious. And we have really a pretty strict termination going on here. Let's talk about that just a little bit.
Certainly. Try not to go too long on this, but EVs are sort of my bread and butter. My background lies in EV reporting, so this one's particularly of interest to me. But we know the Trump administration has made it very clear that it hopes to eliminate what it calls this EV mandate, this Biden era EV mandate, which we know there was not a mandate for automakers to sell EVs or for consumers to buy them. But there was this target really for half of new vehicles sold in the US by 2030 to be electric, which was significant. So Trump instead has targeted that, federal EV charging money, blocking California's ban on new sales of gas-powered cars, et cetera, et cetera. These credits are just another part of that attack on EVs more broadly. 25E, that's the used EV credit. It's either $4,000 or 30% of the sale price. That would be terminated about 90 days after passed. Then there's 30D, the new EV credit you have on the screen here. That's $7,500 for new EVs. That's split up into a 3750 credit based on critical mineral sourcing criteria we won't get into, and then another 3750 determined on the battery component sourcing. But that was also really significant as far as boosting EV adoption in the US in 2024. That would be terminated. The commercial clean vehicle credit, which really enables folks, average consumers, to take advantage of EV leasing. There's sort of this leasing loophole lying in that commercial credit. That's $7,500 terminated. And then there's the 30C alternative fuel vehicle refueling property credit, kind of a mouthful there. Essentially, charging, that would also be terminated a little bit later, though, 12 months after pass. So, automakers are looking at this, consumers are looking at this, the broader, EV industry is taking a look. And I mean, this is really a full out repeal.
Yeah, yeah. And hits the entire supply chain for all the parts and components. So more than just the production itself. We're going to have to move a little bit quickly so we give enough time to get through other things. I didn't want to miss that there's in the Senate bill a clawback of $5 billion that hasn't been awarded, and that goes for things like state level training so people can take advantage of these things, as well as money that could be in there for expanding transmission capacity, which is pretty important. But I'd like to focus on something, this foreign entity restriction, which could be a really big deal. What is that? Why is it so difficult to sort out?
That's definitely a tricky one, really top of mind for the industry. It basically cuts access to the credits for companies, doing business with those that are considered foreign entities of concern. And why this is an issue is because so much of the clean energy transition here in the U.S. Is reliant on sources, parts from abroad. I mean, we just don't have the supply chain here yet to be, fully American made, right? And so you have industry, you have advocates, you have lobbyists saying that as the text currently stands, and especially this clause, it really counteracts or contradicts what this administration's agenda is as far as American energy dominance and U.S. manufacturing, because we just don't have that robust clean energy supply chain yet, the manufacturing base, the workforce here as other countries. And solar is a really big example, right? We know a large part of what the solar industry needs comes from China. These stipulations, not to mention tariffs, which I know we won't get too much in this conversation, but it almost spells a certain death, or at least a significant challenge to U.S. solar. I've spoken with companies in recent months, interviewed them. Many folks who don't necessarily want to be on the record, but have said, look, between the tariffs and these potential policy changes, that too is existential to their business. And the industry really says it needs incentives. It needs, the broader federal support to be able to align with the administration's goal for domestic manufacturing. But at the same time, cutting off such a significant part of the supply chain is really difficult to work with. These things just can't be built here overnight.
Yeah. Yep. I'll probably get into it with Scott a little bit. Um, there can be technology licensed from China. I think it's probably no one really is quite clear on how this foreign entity provision might play out. But in theory, you would at least want to ask, might this scuttle a project that's otherwise, steaming ahead? You can see in this slide why there's a great deal of interest in the reconciliation process in grabbing these tax credits so that they can cover the costs of the tax cuts that they want to provide. And these numbers come from the Joint Taxation Committee in Congress. Very reliable numbers. And we're looking at, just from these estimates, 5-year estimate, right? $346 billion over those 5 years. So, it's not like these things are baked in. These are estimates, but they do give you an idea of the order of magnitude. And I think that, some people might be surprised to see that the home use tax credits add up to close to $60 billion over 5 years. So real money at the level of households. Before I let you go, we got to talk to the geography of investment. I pulled this, from Atlas Public Policy's data, and you can just see the concentration. Roughly 80% of the big projects with the most jobs are in red states. I'm just curious, Alexa, how has the AEP been trying to cover this aspect?
Well, it's really interesting, right? Because you touched on this earlier as well, but You see Republicans in Congress voting to eliminate these credits and advocating to eliminate these credits that have really benefited their districts and their communities over the past couple of years. So it's this interesting, dichotomy there. But we also know that after the House vote, several House Republicans actually lobbied the Senate to try to preserve some of these incentives that, GOP lawmakers had voted to erase. And you just mentioned this in the last slide, right? We're talking billions of dollars, thousands of jobs. All across the country, but a majority in, these red areas. So to answer your question, how AP is looking at this, we've been trying to follow the changes each time, there's a new text, a new provision, a new draft, something. We've been taking a look at that, but we've also been paying close attention to, who's voting for what, who's advocating for what, and what that means specifically, for their state, their district, their community. It is kind of interesting to sort of, call some of those lawmakers out, right? And say, listen, you've benefited from billions of dollars. Why vote against that now? So keeping track of it like everyone else is, trying to stay on top of the latest. And of course, speaking with the lobbyists, speaking with the industry, trying to get a handle on just exactly, what folks are trying to get here ahead of this, potential informal July 4th deadline that we have.
Right. Alexa, awesome. I know we've covered a lot of ground. Folks, don't worry. Slides will be available, and we'll also have a transcript. So Alexa, fantastic. Thank you so much. Stick around. I hope you do. But we're going to shift on over and get Tom Taylor into the conversation. So Tom's a senior policy analyst with Atlas Public Policy. And Atlas has put together a really fine interactive database that's gathered up the work and the projects spurred by the Inflation Reduction Act. And what everyone likes about this is you can drill down and see the activity in your state and actually see a list of the individual projects and facilities. So Tom, thank you for joining us.
Of course. John, do you want me to share my screen and I can show you
Yep.
this?
Okay,
Okay.
let me go ahead and I will stop my share.
Cool.
And you are going to take
Yeah.
over.
Okay, cool. Can you see this? Yeah, okay.
Oh, by the way, I just want to say one thing. We may get to this. Francisco, you're asking about there's not much in Alaska and Hawaii. Alaska's a red state, and I'm curious. I think we can go and we could check out Alaska. We're going to be working without a net once Tom shows the general approach to using their tools. And then we are going to do like a live demo. So hopefully that won't be a train wreck, or if there is one, it'll be an amusing one. But anyway, Tom, get us.
Yeah, we'll see if we can find some stuff in Alaska. So, thank you for having me. I'm going to keep these slides quick because John's going to send them around. But my main goal is to make sure you know about these resources and to show you the ways in which you can use them. The sort of important thing is that we are here if you have questions afterwards. I will put my email in the chat and my email's on some of these slides. And so if you're ever unsure or you have questions about the data, we have a pretty comprehensive methodology, but we're also here to help you if you want to cut the data in a certain way or you are just not sure about what you're looking at. A couple of quick things. The data that I'm showing you today is all free, it's all downloadable, it's all filterable. And the data, this is something that we're very proud of. We update the data on a weekly basis. And so that means that the data is really live and captures the picture of what we're seeing and how things are moving. So I'm going to start with the first tool, which is the Clean Economy Tracker, the one that I just put in the chat. There's two main data sources here that it's helpful to flag for you today. One is manufacturing. So this is clean energy manufacturing. And so when we're talking about, Alexa did such a good job in breaking down the credits before, but predominantly here we're talking about 45X. There's overlap with other tax credits, 30D, for instance, the clean vehicle tax credit, and where those vehicles are assembled. There's, a bunch of ways in which this is, dependent on supply, on demand side credits, but this predominantly is 45X, the Advanced Manufacturing Production Tax Credit. And we track this data very closely, and that we have each of these facilities at an address level. Almost all of the data is at an address level. So what that unlocks is an ability to say what the congressional district is, whether it's a rural community, whether it's a low-income community, all these kind of key data points to understand the kinds of communities that these investments are going in. And so that data is all available to you and exportable if you're interested. I'll show you more about filtering in a second. The next data set we have, so that first bit was on manufacturing, so where you're building the products, the batteries, the solar, whatever. The next is on generation, so where you are generating electricity. We track all data sources, all energy sources, all electricity sources, but we are mostly interested in clean energy, and so the default is to show clean energy sources. But we also have gas, oil, coal, different energy sources, and so if that's of interest, let us know, and I can show you how to filter for that. Basically, this shows you, and you can see on this very chaotic map at the bottom, where generation projects are based on the scale of these projects. Again, I think, this data is all in megawatt, gigawatt units, and so that may be a little bit hard for you to unpack or make accessible to users or readers. And so we are here to help if you want help translating those numbers a little better in terms of households, or the classic one is how many Hoover dams in capacity are we talking about. So this data is from EIA. It's updated on a monthly basis from EIA, and we basically instantaneously will update our database to reflect that new data. Then the last one I'm going to show you, so we've gone through manufacturing, generation, and then the last one is on a different tool called the Climate Program Portal. And on this tool, we track federal awards for climate and clean energy projects. This is funding from EJA and IRA, so the two big pieces of legislation. Access to this tool requires a registration, but it will take you 1 minute and it's free, and that just allows us to keep you on our mailing list and to stay engaged with you about updates to the tool. We have this data at a pretty granular level, which allows us again to unpack or understand the communities that are benefiting from these investments, and then yeah.
When you say a granular level,
Yeah.
could someone get to the level of, I'm in this city, I'm in this county, what is being touched by the IRA grants and credits here?
Yeah. So yes, but we have quite granular or local geography for these projects in many cases, but many of the awards, based on the nature of the awards, are state level, multi-state level. They're really big awards, and so they don't necessarily have, even though the impact may be across Nebraska, the award is at a state level for the state of Nebraska. And so it's hard to know exactly where in Nebraska the impact is felt. And so one of the challenges I think in storytelling is both to show those awards at a local level in Lincoln or whatever, but also to note that these awards are at a state level and you have to sort of capture the impact of those awards. The other thing is that some of them are at multi-state awards, and so the biggest program is the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, these big loan programs. And those are we still don't know yet in terms of the locations of the loan recipients.
Okay,
So
so it's good. It's a
a
good
yes and
starting point.
no.
You still have to put in the shoe leather. All right.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah, and a lot of the data
I
is
have
just
to
not
tell
like
you,
that.
people are interested in drilling down. So go ahead.
Okay, cool. Then let me
Move on.
speed up and then we
Yeah.
can do that. So this is basically a good database. And the one thing I know is given a bunch of cancellations we've seen so far, we track cancellations on this tool as well. So where the administration has announced that grants, awards have been canceled, that is tracked here as well. And so that data is available. Let me do this quickly so that and then we can do this in real life. But basically the yellow bar on each of the dashboards is your friend and allows you to filter for dates. So you can see here, say you want to filter after the Inflation Reduction Act, 8/15/2022, you can see what have we seen since that time. So the filter bar, likewise with state, you want to filter for Texas, you want to filter for a particular lawmaker, you can do that. Next there's other ways of sorting. So you can use the toggle. Say you just want to see planned projects. This is the big question about these new tax credits. What is the impact on planned projects, given what Alexa talked through? And so say you want to see planned solar projects. What's planned for solar? You can again toggle and see the state of planned projects across the country. Next, you can download the data. And so if you hover over any visual, you'll see these three little dots. And once you click on them, you can see an option to export the data. That allows you to take it to Excel, play around, filter, build a pivot table, whatever you want to do. And so that makes it slightly easier for some people to sort out what's going on. Next thing is that you should click on visuals because that then sorts the picture. So if you click on Judy Arrington, key member of the Ways and Means Committee from Texas, Republican, he's got more planned energy capacity in his district than any other lawmaker. And so trying to understand what the state of or what the picture looks like, you can do that by clicking on his district and seeing what's coming and when it's coming online and where in the district.
Shall we jump in? I'm just gonna.
Yeah.
You want to let's work without a net. We got a couple of requests. So you're going to be doing your screen share, but it's going to be of your live screen. So folks, bear with us. Hopefully this.
I know I'm nervous about this train wreck you've been talking about, John, but let's see. Okay. Can you see this one?
Yeah, we got you, man.
Cool. Okay.
Absolutely.
So
okay.
This is if you want to actually then play with the data. These are the two manufacturing data points that I was talking about, and then the last one here is deployment. So that's where we're seeing generation across the country.
Yeah.
So
hey, I got a question. Okay, so let's check out Alaska.
Okay.
So walk us through how we would get to Alaska.
Yeah, I'm gonna look at I haven't planned anything here, so let's see what Alaska actually looks like. Give me 1 second. Actually, it might even be better just to come down here and say we want to use the filter bar.
By the way, folks, the way you activate that filter bar, it looks like a little narrow strip, but if you look at the top of it, you will see a chevron. Click the chevron and the filter bar opens up.
Yes, you're well trained, John. You're good at it at this point.
I've made my
You should
mistake.
really, you probably could do my job better than me. Okay, so if you look at clean energy capacity and you filter in the bar for Alaska, you get this map here of where all the clean energy projects are in the state of Alaska. And you can see relative to a lot of other states, it's pretty low, but there's a bunch of hydro power coming online in Alaska. And so that's an interesting data point.
Yeah,
Likewise,
so they can see the table and see the list.
true, sorry. And so this is the full list of projects, the entity, the capacity.
A lot of hydro. There is some solar PV happening there.
Yeah.
Not big, not big.
Yeah, and I should say that this
And
doesn't.
batteries is actually more appreciable just looking at this right now.
Yeah, and so this capacity only is larger than 1 megawatt capacity. So it doesn't capture small community solar or rooftop solar, those kind of projects. And so it's hard to know for
All
that.
right.
And
Guess
then you can
we go-
export the data. Yeah.
Hang in there. We are now going to jump over to Lindsay,
Cool.
who is in Michigan. So let's see what we can do with her in Michigan. If you want to get back to your screen share.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah. Sorry. So
Please, folks, doing requests.
So let me just let me reset for a second. Just
Yep.
And then what we can do is like, depending again on this question of like whether you want to see the state of projects in Michigan or the planned projects by state, but this is the full list of projects, clean energy generation across the country. If you wanted to just see, for instance, say you're really interested in like a project under construction, you could filter accordingly and then come down here and look at where is the big clean energy projects under construction at the moment. And so this is quite a helpful way to filter.
All right.
And then you could zoom into Michigan and see, have a play around with some of these projects and see what kind of projects are planned. Likewise, Michigan is a really big manufacturing state, as we all know. And so you could, again, click on Michigan here. And then when you click on it, you get a really nice picture of the kinds of projects, where those projects are, the companies that are heading those projects. And then we also, of course, track cancellations here. So there's been a bunch of cancellations, including in Michigan, that we've tracked really closely this year. And so those will be represented in the data as a negative number. And again, you can export the data, play around with it.
Bingo. That's so, Lindsay, I hope that gets you started. She says super helpful. All right. I feel like we should move on over to Scott so we have enough time to talk about the action in Washington. If you've got a particular question, Tom has put his email address in there. If you think there's something we should talk about right now, because everyone to pop it in the chat, we'll see if we can get to it. And I want to shift on over to get to Scott. And in order to do that, let me see here. I may go and grab the screen share back again. Bingo. All right. I just want to say, Ernesto, you're curious about whether states are stepping up to backfill what the feds are pulling out of. Let's put that question out there for our guests and see if we can get to that, make sure we get to that before we close out here. But clearly we've got red states have more to lose than blue states. Scott Waldman, White House reporter, Politico's E&E News, has been following that stuff. Scott, really glad to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Let's just talk about how this map that shows these benefits or these projects underway, how is that shaping the debate in Washington?
Well, I mean, it's pretty impressive when you look at a map like this with all the data points on there, and particularly some of the, areas of more significant growth. I don't think it's accidental, of course, that some key swing states, look at Nevada and look at Georgia, even North Carolina, and have some of the biggest circles. That's not accidental. The Obama administration, or excuse me, the Biden administration never really came out and specifically detailed their strategy. A lot of us have just looked at, what's happened and looked at maps like this to sort of, come to the obvious conclusion that clearly they had a strategy here to put a lot of this in red states. Every Republican voted against this bill. They all had some unique reasons. When it comes to how it affected their districts after the bill was passed, we saw some people like Representative Nancy Mace, Representative Modi, not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, in Nevada, and others sort of come out and almost take credit for some of the money that had flowed to their districts from the IRA. Lauren Boebert of Colorado did the same. I think they recognized there was some, potent political potential here when you're literally breaking ground and putting up a new factory in your district. But in terms of, action on the ground, I think we're seeing in the last, few weeks here, I have not seen any Republicans come out and say, this is my line, that I'm not willing to cross. The plan to strip out most of these IRA credits in the big, beautiful bill. Trump is still dominant, obviously, as we know, and I think a lot of the party knows they have to unite behind him or else. I imagine I know there's more private griping behind the scenes by some members, Senator North Carolina, who faces re-election next year, in terms of what he's looking for. Buddy Carter, as you just put on the screen, he's also been another one that supported these credits, but has consistently voted against, what would seem to be the interests of his own district.
Well, it's interesting. Buddy Carter had an interesting conversation with Canary Media, and he said, "I still would like these credits." And I am talking to my fellow Republicans in the Senate, but it's not having much effect. And then he'll follow up and say, we have to let the market decide. So he says all the right words that are in keeping with the Republican thinking, but he also says, I'm trying to keep these credits in place. Is this typical?
I think so, yes. Certainly let the market decide has long been a mantra for Republicans. It's worth noting here that right now, there's some incentives for the oil and gas industry that are going to start, that have been proposed for these bills. The oil and gas industry for, a century has enjoyed tax breaks and other incentives to help and encourage its growth. So we have effectively a nascent industry here with clean energy. It makes sense to sort of nudge it along with some tax incentives and outright grants from the federal government to get some of this built, some of these projects built, and to get consumers, more interested in putting solar on their home, more interested in buying EVs. But Buddy Carter, is one of, I think it was about 18 total Republicans who have sent a letter asking, for some of these credits to be preserved. That appears to have fallen on deaf ears when it comes to the White House. I'm not sure that how much, that relatively small group of Republicans and how can really do in terms of swaying the bill anyways.
Right. Yeah, I mean, even people talk about, there's such a slim margin in the Senate and in the House, but at least on this issue, we are not hearing um, these Republican lawmakers, people like Representative Carter, who would stand to take a hit, um, is they are not saying no. If these aren't protected, I'm not going to vote for the bill. They're not grandstanding at that level. Um,
Can I just
the
add one more thing about the political calculus here? I mean, one of the problems that Democrats had is that they did not really message well on the IRA. I think that a lot of I mean, obviously the name is weird, the Inflation Reduction Act, and that was what
Right.
Democrats had to do to get Joe Manchin to sign on to give it a name that really doesn't suggest that this was a major climate-friendly bill. President Biden certainly went out in the initial year after it was passed and in 2022 and touted the benefits of this and a few groundbreakings. But really, in the run up to the election, the last year, he really didn't talk about this all that often. Harris barely talked about it at all. And when I asked the White House why that was, they pointed to polling showing that people didn't know about it much, didn't seem to rank climate or environment as a priority. So I think, this was one of Biden's signature bills. Really, it never caught on with the Republic. With the public. So in a lot of ways, Representative Carter and others, have a political calculation here where they're saying most people don't even know what this is. So if it goes away, how much is it really going to hurt me?
Yeah. By the way, so Victoria's got a question, just looking for clarification. Does this mean the red states are getting most of the tax credits and yet are voting to repeal them? Answer?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, and we've got Buddy Carter on the screen here. I mean, it's more than just the state. Here's a congressman in his district in particular, that Hyundai plant, which was announced before the IRA. It's important to note, but expanded and used IRA credits as a result. Also in Georgia and Marjorie Taylor Greene district in the Dalton, Georgia area, there's the largest the Q-Cell solar manufacturing facility is the largest in the Western Hemisphere. Now, that also was announced before the IRA. However, it doubled in size to become the largest in the Western Hemisphere as a result of IRA credits. Those are direct jobs. Dalton, Georgia was known as the carpet capital of the world for years and faded away, as so much American manufacturing did. Now it easily could make a claim to be, the solar manufacturing capital of not just the United States, but of the world. And Marjorie Taylor Greene has never she said she likes, solar jobs in her district, but she's never done anything to encourage any money coming from the federal government to go there. So I think the Biden administration made it a calculation that Republicans couldn't vote against this, and the Biden administration was wrong. They are voting against it.
Yeah. You and I talked briefly about the companies are free to do their lobbying. And you mentioned Hyundai, and you mentioned Hyundai's lobbying efforts are larger compared to where they were last year. The folks at Open Secrets, they were very nice. I said, can you try to give me an idea of where the action is related to certain keywords tied to renewable energy? And they did put together a spreadsheet of about 300 firms that have hired lobbyists. I just want to whip through one quick example in case it's useful for people, and I'm not going to dwell on this, but it is a good illustration of where you can hit some of the curveballs in tracking the pathway of lobbying. Even when you start off with, you've got, on the spreadsheet from Open Secrets, Plug Power, right? Turns out to be a hydrogen firm. So I thought, okay, let me just see how much action have they been engaged in, and flipping through the different steps there, put it in there, and ended up with Plug Power. And then you click on them, and you can see their activity, which is handy. And this would be as true for Hyundai as well. We have a link to that in our resources page. And then when you click in deeper, you see who are the lobbyists that they have hired. And this takes you to, and I just grabbed this one, as being top on the list, Bracewell. When you click on them, going over to the election side of the Open Secrets website, then you see that they are there very big in Texas. And as it turns out, Plug Power has a project that they are trying to get off the ground in Texas. So this is just an illustration of kind of the different steps across the stream that you need to take within Open Secrets to begin to get to a little closer to what you're hoping to find or might illuminate some of your reporting. I do want to just, oh, hang in there. We got a question from Julia in covering rural communities. Given the downstream economic impacts clean energy developments can have in rural communities, are you seeing any Republicans who represent rural districts capitulate or bend at all?
I mean, in terms of if they're bending to say, I'm not going to vote, for this bill because it's going to ruin the IRA credits that are building something in my backyard. No, I have not. I can't think of a single one who said that they've drawn the line in the sand. And, I work with 60 other people just covering energy and environment issues. I surveyed some of them. We could not find any Republicans who are willing to say this was it. Of course, I think any member, certainly of the House, that would not vote for this is guaranteed to face a pretty harsh, primary next year from someone who would gladly say, they'll vote against this type of legislation in the future. So, Marjorie Taylor Greene's district, as I said, around Dalton, Georgia, is fairly rural. And, she's sort of willing to let any incentives go by the wayside right now.
One thing that I think is important, it's a cautionary note. You may see that a project has been canceled. There was an article recently that worked off of Atlas's data, $14 billion in projects canceled. But it's a very complete job in presenting that information, and there are links provided that show you what's going on with that project. Are you surprised, Scott, that when I clicked on a number of those links, I found that the reasons those projects failed were not necessarily related to what's going on in Washington right now, or they might be related to tariffs, but not to this discussion of tax credits?
No, I'm not shocked. I think, all these, as Alexa had talked about as well, like a lot of these investors, a lot of these companies need long-term certainty. And, that's not just affected by the IRA, that's also affected by what's happening around the world. That's affected by supply chain issues still in some instances, inflation, borrowing rates. So all those, right now it's a period of turmoil. So even if it's not the IRA that killed the project, it could, or the tariffs that killed the project, it could be the borrowing rates. Offshore wind has had a real issue with that in terms of getting some projects off the ground there as well.
The interest rates that they have to pay can make it really difficult. And I've got a question from Kiersey. How does the estimated value of renewable energy credits compare to different subsidies given to the fossil fuel industry? Scott, can you field that off the top of your head?
Yes. I mean, I don't know the amount off the top of my head, but of course, we're talking about going back a century here. So it's an overwhelmingly lopsided benefits to the fossil fuel industry. Even now, the Trump administration is pushing for more, expanded drilling in the Arctic, as well as on public lands. I mean, that's where companies are essentially given, the land for pennies on the dollar, effectively, with very minimal payments, very minimal, cash reserves required to clean up for potential pollution. Those are incentives as well, certainly. So, I'm sure there's a group out there that's done the calculation more recently, but it's tremendously lopsided.
Two last questions, Scott. IRA clearly facing major headwinds. I just wonder, as you've looked at it, where did it have the most success getting projects up and running, what have you?
So I mean, again, I keep talking about Georgia. You have a EV industry that's growing, battery manufacturing around the Hyundai plant, which is making the latest version of the Ioniq, which is one of the best-selling EVs in the country. I would put that up there. Obviously, domestic solar panels. We barely have the capacity in this country. We don't have the capacity in this country to meet our needs. So that's certainly something that's only guaranteed to grow. Nevada has had tremendous success. Nevada is the only active lithium mining in the country, I believe, right now. Only active lithium mine that's needed, not just for clean energy, but for all sorts of applications. North Carolina has a tremendous amount of potential there, hoping to unlock for lithium mining, but that doesn't appear to have taken off. So those are important areas to look at. But as you're looking to localize this, as a former local reporter, I would also look at the small projects. I used to work in Erie, Pennsylvania, and I worked in Albany, New York, and all the small towns around there. I can tell you a job that's employs 100 people in one of the little towns outside of Albany or Erie, Pennsylvania, that's making some sort of new component for a battery or for a wind turbine or solar panel or whatever it is. There's all these sort of little widgets that go into each individual solar panel, and somebody's got to manufacture them. So there's a lot of potential jobs on a small scale that have barely received any coverage. And to that end, as you're looking to localize this, I think it's really undercovered. The jobs that are going away and the factories that are going away, I think there's a lot of potential to learn about something in your state or your area of coverage and go and say, hey, here's where it's going to be. Talk to the neighbors, talk to local politicians, not national politicians, not members of Congress, figure out what it means.
You would probably start just at the county level, economic development people.
Absolutely. Yeah, and also
Yeah.
the local town supervisor, county officials. These are people that are on the ground trying to get this up. In a rural county, they know the real power of 50 new jobs in a new factory in a way that people like me have just ignored for the last few years because we're focused on all the big ticket items for the most part. I can give you one example of a project that I went to write about under the IRA that's pretty impressive, and in very small amount of money. I wanted to do a tiny grant, and that was $10 million given to the Navajo-based companies that are working on the reservation there. There's still one of the places in the country where there are people still without electric in their homes are on the Native American reservations throughout the country. And the Navajo, for just $10 million, were getting solar panels to power their homes for the first time. These are often multi-generational homes who are having air conditioning for the first time in Arizona, and that is because they were getting solar power, heavily incentivized by the IRA, changing the individual lives of a few people, the original Americans, of course. And a lot of that money is now going away. That's just a tiny drop in the bucket, but a really powerful story. I went out there in October to tell it, and there's more follow-ups to do all around the country. Also, if you have Native American reservations that are usually large and sprawling and high poverty rates.
Yep. Thank you for that. And I hope that you'll share that link so that people can read that story. Last question. Trump said he wants this bill on his desk by July 4th, 8 days from now. Do you think he's going to make it?
I mean, I stopped making political predictions just because I've been wrong so many times. I do think that he has the weight to move the party like no other politician for either side has been able to do in recent memory. So I could certainly make an argument that yes, he's ultimately going to get it done. I could also make an argument against it because the Senate parliamentarian just ruled against a lot of key incentives. The Medicaid fight is the biggest one now that because lawmakers know that's going to immediately be obvious to people in a way that losing IRA funding is not. So they've got a lot of big ticket items, but the story of the Trump era is that it looks like everything's falling apart. And then a day later, everybody's on board, and the administration has already threatened. Carolyn Levitt, the White House spokeswoman, said, I hope the president doesn't have to come and whip members, but he will if need to. So I know that's a powerful voice that can motivate a lot of people who might be worried about a local rural hospital in their district.
All right, Scott, Thank you so much for all of this. It's been really great.
Thank you.
By the way, I've got up on the screen right now. We were talking about putting in the shoe leather. We've got a free course over at Poynter. And if you grab that QR code, you can go to that page and enroll. Karen Bird at Poynter, who wrote that, has been part of multiple Pulitzer Prize winning teams. She is an awesome researcher, and she shares a lot of her tips how to do it. It's there for you to sign up and take it for free and work through it to work on your own research tools. Scott, thank you for that link. That's excellent. I want to thank everyone who has tuned in. I know life is really busy. I have loved this collaboration between Poynter and covering climate now, and I say let's do it again. Special thank you, David Dixon, for making today go so smoothly. And I want to thank Anna Hyatt, who's been working on this all the way through. Alexa, Tom, Scott, you guys are fantastic. I want to say good luck to all of you out there. Thanks for keeping people informed because it's what they pay us for. So take care.